On a night that promised reconciliation, Claire, pregnant, believed she would finally have peace with her husband Ethan. But everything changes when she is poisoned by Victoria, his mistress, in front of everyone at a luxurious restaurant. Little do they know that Claire is about to reveal a truth capable of destroying and rebuilding lives. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear in your life. The restaurant hall gleamed under the lights of crystal chandeliers that hung from the high ceiling, reflecting golden hues over tables covered with impeccably ironed white linen tablecloths. Claire adjusted the navy blue dress she had chosen so carefully that afternoon, feeling the light fabric caress her slightly rounded belly. 3 months pregnant, and she still couldn't quite believe she was carrying a life inside her, a life that represented hope, but also an enormous weight of responsibility amidst the turmoil her marriage had become. Beside her, Edward checked his phone for the 3rd time in less than 5 minutes. His fingers slid across the screen with irritating familiarity, as if the device were an extension of his own body. Claire bit her lower lip, resisting the urge to comment. Not tonight. Tonight needed to be different. Edward had promised it would be different. They had talked the previous week, a difficult conversation in which he had acknowledged his mistakes, his absence, his distance. He had promised that everything would change, that this night would mark a new beginning for them, for the family they were building. Claire wanted to believe. She needed to believe. The restaurant Edward had chosen was in Mayfair, one of London's most sophisticated neighbourhoods. The Gardenia was known for its refined French cuisine and intimate atmosphere that attracted couples seeking special moments. The walls were decorated with gold-framed mirrors, multiplying the sense of spaciousness and elegance. A pianist played softly in the background, classical melodies that floated through the air like musical whispers. She sighed, trying to focus on the present moment, on the beauty around her, on the possibilities that night could bring. But something bothered her, a strange feeling in her chest, an intuition she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was just pregnancy fatigue or surging hormones, or perhaps it was something deeper, a 6th sense warning her that not all was well. It was then that Claire saw her. Victoria entered the restaurant as if the place had been built especially for her. Dark brown hair fell in perfect waves over her bare shoulders, highlighted by the tight red dress that hugged every curve of her body. Sky-high heels echoed against the marble floor as she walked with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. But it was her gaze that impacted Claire most. Victoria met her eyes even before reaching the table, and in that brief instant, Claire saw something that chilled her to the bone. Contempt. Pure and thinly veiled contempt. Claire looked at Edward, expecting to see surprise or embarrassment on his face, but there was none of that. He stood up naturally, a small smile on his lips as if Victoria's presence was absolutely normal and expected. It was only then that Claire understood. This was not a night of reconciliation. It was not a romantic dinner for a fresh start. It was something entirely different, and she had been too naive to realize. Victoria approached, and Edward pulled up a chair for her on the other side of the table. Claire felt her throat tighten. Should she say something? Should she get up and leave? But her legs seemed glued to the chair, and her voice had been lost somewhere between shock and humiliation. "Hello, Claire," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Edward has told me so much about you." Her voice was soft, almost melodious, but there was a layer of sarcasm that didn't go unnoticed. Claire could only nod, unable to form words. Her hands clenched around the linen napkin on her lap, squeezing until her knuckles turned white. Edward cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the silence that had settled. "I thought it would be good for all of us to talk," he said, avoiding Claire's gaze. "To clear things up, you know. We're all adults here." Clear things up. The words echoed in Claire's mind like an insult. What things needed to be cleared up? That he was cheating? That he had brought his mistress to dinner with his pregnant wife? What kind of clarification was that? A waiter approached with the establishment's typical elegance, holding a discreet pad to take orders. Edward was quick to order a bottle of red wine, one of the most expensive on the menu. Victoria ordered sparkling water with lemon. Claire remained silent until the waiter looked at her, waiting. "Just water," she managed to murmur. The pianist shifted to a new, more melancholic melody. Claire recognized Chopin, one of the nocturnes her mother used to play when she was a child. The memory brought a pang of pain to her chest. Her mother would have known exactly what to do in that situation. She would have had the courage that Claire felt she lacked at that moment. "How are you feeling with the pregnancy?" Victoria asked suddenly, leaning slightly forward. The chandelier lights reflected in her diamond earrings, small points of light dancing with every movement of her head. "It must be so special to carry a life inside you." There was something in the way she said that which made Claire shiver. It wasn't genuine curiosity or sympathy. It was something more calculated, colder, as if Victoria was measuring, evaluating, planning something Claire couldn't decipher. "It's all right," Claire replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "It's a delicate time, but I'm managing." "I'm sure you are," Victoria said, leaning back in her chair again. Her smile widened slightly, but her eyes remained hard as stone. "It's admirable, really, to keep fighting for something even when all signs tell you to let go." Claire felt blood rush to her face. The insinuation was too clear to ignore, but before she could respond, Edward interrupted, his voice a tone louder than necessary. "Let's focus on dinner, okay? I didn't come here for arguments." The waiter returned with the drinks, delicately placing the glasses on the table. Claire watched as he poured water into her glass, the ice cubes clinking softly against the glass. Victoria picked up her glass and took a long sip, never taking her eyes off Claire. The tension at the table was palpable, an invisible weight that seemed to suck the air around them. Other diners chatted and laughed at their own tables, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding there. Claire wanted to be anywhere but there. She wanted to go back in time and refuse Edward's invitation. She wanted to have trusted her intuition that had told her from the beginning that something was wrong. But she was there, trapped in that impossible situation, with her unfaithful husband and the woman who had destroyed her marriage, pretending it was civilized, that it was normal, that it was acceptable. Edward finally put his phone away in his jacket pocket and looked at the menu. "Let's order soon," he said. "I'm starving." Claire picked up her own menu, but the letters seemed blurred before her eyes. Nausea rose in her throat, and she wasn't sure if it was from the pregnancy or the situation. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the laminated card, trying to focus on the dishes described in French with Portuguese translations just below. Victoria leaned towards Edward, her hand lightly touching his arm as she pointed to something on the menu. The gesture was intimate, familiar, a clear display of possession. Claire averted her gaze, unable to bear the sight. The waiter returned and they placed their orders. Claire chose randomly, without really processing what she was ordering. Her mind was far away, lost in thoughts of how her life had come to that point, about the choices that had brought her to that table, to that moment of absolute humiliation. When the waiter walked away, Victoria turned to Claire with a smile that seemed rehearsed. "You know, Claire," she began, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "I think it's important that we have this conversation, as mature women that we are." Claire stared at her, waiting, her heart pounding in her chest. Whatever Victoria was about to say, she knew it wouldn't be good. She could feel it in the way the other woman's eyes gleamed with an almost predatory light, in the way her lips curved in anticipation. And it was at that moment, as the golden lights of the chandelier continued to dance over the tables and the piano played its melancholic melody, that Claire realized that the night was just beginning, and that the worst was yet to come. Edward looked at Victoria with an almost imperceptible nod of his head, as if giving her permission to continue. Claire saw the exchange and felt her stomach churn. There was a complicity between them that went beyond the physical, a connection that completely excluded her. They were two conspirators sharing a secret, and she was the only one who didn't fully understand the game being played. "The truth is, Edward and I have something special," Victoria continued, her voice low but perfectly audible above the ambient music. "Something that cannot be denied or ignored. And I think it would be better for everyone if you accepted that. Claire felt the room spin slightly. Victoria's words echoed in her mind, each syllable like a small stab. She looked at Edward, hoping he would deny it, that he would defend their marriage, that he would show some remnant of the decency she thought he possessed. But Edward merely stared at his wineglass, swirling the dark red liquid within the crystal, as if that sight was the most fascinating thing in the world. "You brought your mistress to dinner with me," Claire finally found her voice, shaky but present. "To tell me I should accept this? To publicly humiliate me?" "It's not about humiliation," Edward replied, finally raising his eyes. "It's about being honest, about not living lies." The hypocrisy of those words almost made Claire laugh. Not living lies. He had lied to her for months, perhaps years. He had promised fidelity, love, partnership. He had promised that night would be about starting over, and now he spoke of honesty, as if it were a concept he truly understood. A couple at the next table discreetly glanced in their direction, sensing the tension that was becoming more visible. Claire noticed and forced herself to lower her voice, to control the emotions that threatened to overflow. She wouldn't give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her completely lose control, not there, not in front of strangers. "You're pregnant." "With my child," Edward said, and there was a strange coldness in his voice, as if he were talking about a business contract and not about the life they had created together. "That won't change, but my feelings won't change either. I need you to understand my position." "Your position," Claire repeated, and this time she really laughed, a bitter sound that came out louder than she intended. "Your position is that you want to keep a wife and a mistress, that you want to have everything without giving up anything?" "Many people live in arrangements like that," Victoria interjected, leaning forward again. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped on the table, an irritating rhythm that heightened the tension. "Modern, flexible relationships, there's nothing wrong with it if everyone agrees." "But I don't agree," Claire said, her voice breaking on the last word. "I never agreed." The waiter arrived at that moment with the first course, an appetizer of foie gras artistically arranged on thin toasts with red fruit jam. He placed the dishes before each of them with precise and efficient movements, oblivious to the emotional storm unfolding. Claire looked at the food on her plate and felt nausea rise. Again, there was no way she could eat. Her throat felt closed, her stomach too churned to accept any food. Victoria picked up her fork and knife, delicately cutting a piece of the foie gras. She chewed slowly, with evident pleasure, her eyes closed in appreciation. "It's delicious," she commented, as if they were at a normal dinner among friends. "Edward, you chose very well." Edward smiled at her, a genuine smile that Claire hadn't seen directed at her in months. The pain of that realization was almost physical. She watched the two interact, the ease between them, the way. Edward leaned slightly towards Victoria when she spoke, the way his eyes lit up in response to something she said. "Claire, you need to eat something," Edward said, finally turning his attention to her. "For the baby's sake." His concern sounded fake, mechanical, as if it was something he knew he should say, not something he actually felt. Claire picked up her fork, just to have something to occupy her hands, but didn't put anything in her mouth. The restaurant continued its normal life around them. Waiters circulated between tables. The pianist played his soft melodies. Other couples chatted and laughed. Claire felt completely disconnected from that world, as if she were trapped in a bubble of unreality from which she couldn't escape. "You know, Claire," Victoria said, after delicately wiping her lips with her napkin, "perhaps it's time for you to think about what's best for the baby. A child needs to grow up in a harmonious environment, not amidst conflict and resentment." The audacity of that woman left Claire momentarily speechless. She was there, the person who had destroyed her marriage, talking about what was best for Claire's baby, talking about harmony while creating the exact opposite. "Don't you dare," Claire began, her voice an intense whisper. "Talk about my son. You have no right." "We all want what's best for the child," Edward interjected, trying to assume a conciliatory tone that only served to irritate Claire even more. "That's why we need to find a civilized solution." "Civilized," Claire repeated. that word again, as if there was anything civilized about betrayal, about disrespect, about seating your pregnant wife at a table with your mistress and expecting her to simply accept the situation. Victoria picked up her water glass and took a long sip, her eyes never leaving Claire's face. There was something calculated in her every move, every word, every glance. It was as if she were following a script, executing a carefully crafted plan, and Claire was just a piece in this game, a piece that needed to be moved or removed. "You know," Victoria continued, placing the glass back on the table, "there's an elegant way out of all this, one that would allow you and the baby to live comfortably, without all this stress that is clearly affecting you." Claire stared at her, waiting. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it, in her own ears, a constant drum of anxiety and fear. "Edward is willing to ensure that you and the child are well taken care of financially," Victoria explained. "A beautiful house, a generous allowance, everything you need. All you have to do is agree to make things easier for everyone." "A divorce," Claire said, the word coming out like ashes from her mouth. "You're offering me money in exchange for a divorce." "I'm offering a practical solution," Victoria corrected, "one that benefits everyone." Claire looked at Edward again, searching for some sign that it bothered him, that he saw the cruelty of that situation. But he merely stared at his own plate, his jaw tense, his lips pressed into a thin line. It was then that Claire understood. All of this had been planned. The dinner, Victoria's presence, the talk of civilized solutions. Everything had been carefully orchestrated to push her into a corner, to make her accept the unacceptable. "I need to use the restroom," Claire said abruptly, pushing her chair back. Her legs trembled as she stood, but she forced herself to remain upright, to walk with some dignity towards the back of the restaurant where the restrooms were located. Behind her she could hear Edward say something in a low voice to Victoria, but she couldn't distinguish the words. She didn't want to distinguish them. All she wanted was to escape, even if for just a few minutes, from that table, from those people, from that impossible situation. The corridor leading to the restrooms was quieter, isolated from the main restaurant noise. Claire leaned against the cold wall, closing her eyes and trying to breathe deeply. Her hands automatically went to her belly, seeking comfort in the knowledge that she carried a life there, a reason to continue to fight. But when she opened her eyes again, preparing to return to the table, Claire saw Victoria walking towards her, a strange smile on her lips. And it was then that she realized that the night was far from over and that the true horrors were yet to come. "Claire, what a surprise to see you so distressed," Victoria said, stopping a few feet away. Her tone was one of fake concern, so transparent it was almost offensive. "Is dinner being difficult for you?" Claire straightened her shoulders, refusing to show weakness before that woman. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice firmer than she expected. "I just needed a moment." Victoria moved closer, until they were less than a meter apart. Claire could smell her perfume, something expensive and intense, almost suffocating in the confined space of the corridor. Victoria's eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel like an insect under a microscope. "You know, Claire," Victoria said, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper, "you really should accept Edward's offer. It's generous considering everything. Some women wouldn't even have that option." The audacity of that statement made Claire's blood boil. Option? As if she should be grateful for being offered an allowance to silently exit her own husband's life. As if she should be thankful for being discarded like an object that had lost its usefulness. "I'm not giving up my marriage just because you showed up," Claire said, surprising herself with the strength in her own voice. "Edward is my husband. I'm carrying our child. You have no right to him whatsoever." "Right," Victoria repeated with a cold smile. "Interesting that you talk about rights when Edward clearly made his choice. Or do you think he brought you here with me for another reason?" The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut, not because they were a surprise, but because they confirmed what she already knew deep down. Edward had chosen. Perhaps he had chosen a long time ago, and she had just refused to see the signs. "You don't know him like I do," Victoria continued, taking another step forward. "You don't know what he truly likes, what he truly needs. You were just a stage in his life, Claire, and now that stage has come to an end. Claire felt tears burn in her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. She wouldn't give Victoria that satisfaction. She took a deep breath, fighting to maintain control, not to let that woman see her break. "May I ask one thing?" Claire said after a moment, her voice trembling but clear. "Why are you doing this? Why not just continue your affair in secret like so many others do? Why do you need to destroy me?" Something shifted in Victoria's expression. For a brief instant, Claire saw something beyond the facade of confidence and cruelty. She saw something darker, deeper. Envy, perhaps, or hatred, or both. "Because you have something that should be mine," Victoria said simply, "and I always take what's mine." Before Claire could respond, Victoria turned and began walking back to the main dining room. Claire watched her for a moment, processing those words. She had something that should be Victoria's. What exactly did that mean? Did Victoria and Edward know each other from before? Was there a history there that Claire was completely unaware of? She forced herself to move, to follow back to the table. Her legs still trembled, but she refused to remain hidden in the corridor. She needed to go back, face the situation, discover the full truth. When she returned to the table, the main course had already been served. A perfectly seared filet mignon rested on a bed of truffled mashed potatoes, accompanied by bright green asparagus. The presentation was impeccable, worthy of a 3 Michelin-star restaurant, but to Claire it might as well have been cardboard. Edward looked at her as she sat down. "Are you all right?" he asked, but the concern in his voice sounded mechanical, automatic. "Perfectly," Claire lied, picking up her napkin and placing it back on her lap. Victoria was already cutting her steak, each movement precise and delicate. She ate with the pleasure of someone who knew she was winning, who had total control of the situation. Claire watched her, studying the woman's expressions, trying to understand what truly motivated her. "You should drink something," Victoria said suddenly, pushing Claire's water glass closer to her. "You're looking a bit pale. Hydration is important, especially in your condition." Claire looked at the glass. Was it the same glass as before? She wasn't sure. All the glasses looked the same, fine crystal with ice water and lemon slices floating inside. But something in the way. Victoria pushed it towards her, and the insistence in her voice made Claire hesitate. "I'm fine," she said without touching the glass. "I insist," Victoria said, her smile widening slightly. "The water here is filtered, you know, fresher. It's good for you and the baby." Edward looked at Victoria and then at Claire. "She's right," he said. "You need to hydrate." There was something about their insistence that bothered Claire. Why was it so important that she drink from that exact glass? But then she thought perhaps she was being paranoid, letting the stressful situation affect her judgment. It was. Just water and ice. What could be wrong? Reluctantly, Claire picked up the glass and brought it to her lips. The water was indeed fresh, icy against her tongue. She took a small sip and placed the glass back on the table. Victoria watched with a satisfaction that seemed excessive for something as simple as drinking water. Claire tried to ignore it, focusing on cutting a small piece of steak on her plate. The meat was perfectly tender, melting under the knife, but she had little appetite. The minutes passed with torturous slowness. Edward and Victoria talked about work, about mutual acquaintances Claire didn't even know existed, about future plans that clearly didn't include her. Claire remained silent, pushing food around her plate, making minimal efforts to appear to be eating. It was about 15 minutes later that she started to feel strange. At first it was subtle, a tingling in her fingertips that she attributed to poor circulation. Then a sensation of heat that spread through her body, causing small beads of sweat to form on her forehead. The restaurant suddenly felt very hot, the air very dense. "Claire, are you all right?" Edward asked. And this time there was a genuine note of concern in his voice. She tried to answer, but her tongue felt heavy, the words jumbling before they came out. She began, but her voice came out strange, slurred. The room began to spin gently. The lights of the chandeliers multiplied in her vision, reflecting and distorting like in a kaleidoscope. Claire blinked several times, trying to focus, but everything remained blurry, indistinct at the edges. Her heart began to beat irregularly, sometimes too fast, sometimes skipping beats. She brought her hand to her chest, feeling the erratic rhythm beneath her ribs. Something was very wrong. This wasn't just stress or pregnancy fatigue. This was something more. "Edward," she whispered, trying to get his attention. But he was looking at his phone again, absorbed in some message. Claire tried to stand up, but her legs didn't respond properly. The world tilted dangerously sideways and she clutched the edge of the table, trying to steady herself. It was then that her eyes met Victoria's, and what she saw there chilled her to the bone. There was no surprise on that woman's face, no concern. There was satisfaction, pure and simple satisfaction, as if she were watching a show she had eagerly awaited. Claire opened her mouth to speak, to accuse, to scream, but no sound came out. Her vision began to darken at the edges, a black tunnel closing around her line of sight. She saw Victoria smile, a small, triumphant smile. She saw Edward finally raise his eyes, his expression changing from irritation to something close to alarm. And then, as the golden lights of the restaurant flickered and went out, Claire felt her body give way completely. The floor rose to meet her and everything went dark. The sound came first, even before sight. Urgent voices overlapping, hurried footsteps, the clinking of breaking glass. Claire struggled to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt like lead. Her body lay on the cold restaurant floor, and she could feel the icy marble against her cheek. There was pain, a dull ache that pulsed through her entire body, but especially concentrated in her head and stomach. "Someone call an ambulance," a high-pitched, alarmed female voice shouted. "Claire," Edward managed to say, and she felt hands touch her shoulder, shaking her lightly. "Claire, wake up, stop this drama." Drama. The word echoed faintly in her hazy consciousness. He thought it was drama, that she was faking it, exaggerating. Even there, fallen on the floor, unable to move properly, he accused her of manipulation. She tried to speak, to say it wasn't drama, that something was terribly wrong, but her mouth wouldn't form the words. She could only emit a low, almost inaudible moan. "Sir, please step back," an authoritative male voice said. One of the waiters, Claire vaguely realized. She needs space. Gradually, Claire's vision began to return, although everything seemed covered in a thick fog. She saw faces circling above her, some concerned, others merely curious. The crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling far above, its light still shining with celestial indifference. "I don't know what happened," Edward was saying to someone. "She was fine a few minutes ago. My wife is a bit dramatic sometimes, you know how it is." "Excuse me," another voice interrupted, an older woman Claire didn't recognize. "But I saw what happened from this table. That woman," she pointed presumably at Victoria, pushed a drink towards her just before she collapsed. "It was just water," Victoria replied, her voice too calm, too controlled. "She said she was thirsty. I was just being kind." "Kind," the older woman repeated with evident skepticism. "It seemed more calculated than kind, if you ask my opinion." "Nobody wants your opinion, madam," Edward said, his voice taking on a hostile tone. "Please mind your own business." Claire tried to move, tried to sit up, but her body didn't respond properly. All she could do was turn her head slightly to the side, and even that small movement made the world spin violently. "The ambulance will be here in 5 minutes," someone announced. "There's a paramedic here in the restaurant. He's coming." Seconds later, Claire felt firm but gentle hands checking her pulse, lifting her eyelids to examine her pupils. "She's reacting, but she's very disoriented," the man said. "Her pupils are dilated, irregular heartbeat. Do you know what she ate or drank?" "Just dinner," Edward said. "The same thing as all of us." The paramedic frowned, clearly not satisfied with that answer. "Does she have any medical conditions, allergies?" "She's pregnant," Edward informed. 3 months. The news seemed to heighten the urgency. The paramedic looked around, searching for something. "Did anyone see what she drank? Which glass was hers?" "It was this one," another waiter said, appearing with a half-full glass of water. "It's the one that was in front of her." The paramedic carefully took the glass, smelling its contents. "I need to take this for analysis," he said. There's something strange here." "Strange," Edward repeated with a nervous laugh. "What kind of strange?" Before the paramedic could answer, another waiter approached, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25. "Excuse me for interrupting," he said hesitantly, "but I need to say something. I saw when that lady," he gestured towards Victoria, "swapped the glass of the customer who fainted. She did it when her husband wasn't looking." The silence that followed was absolute. All eyes turned to Victoria, who remained seated at the table, her face a mask of calm that was beginning to crack at the edges. "That's absurd," she said, but there was a note of panic in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Why would I do something like that?" "That's a good question," the older woman who had spoken before said, "but I saw it too. You did something to that glass, and then you kept insisting she drink." "You're all crazy," Edward began, but his voice sounded less certain now, less convinced. The ambulance crew arrived at that moment, professional paramedics with a stretcher and medical equipment. They quickly assessed Claire, checking her vital signs, asking quick questions of the paramedic who was already there. "Suspected poisoning," he informed. "Possible drink tampering. The glass needs to be tested." "Poisoning," one of the new paramedics repeated. "We're taking her to the hospital immediately. Where's the family?" "I'm the husband," Edward said, but one of the paramedics looked at him suspiciously. "You'll need to come to the police station afterwards." Another man, whom Claire realized was a restaurant security guard, informed him. "There are serious allegations being made here." It was at that moment, as they carefully moved her to the stretcher, that Claire felt a wave of consciousness and anger wash over her. With superhuman effort, she opened her eyes completely, focusing on Victoria, who was still sitting at the table, watching everything with an increasingly nervous expression. "You," Claire managed to say, her voice weak but audible. "It was you. You poisoned me." The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "She's delirious," Victoria said, looking around at the onlookers. "She doesn't know what she's saying." But Claire didn't look away. She kept her eyes fixed on Victoria, pouring all the strength she still had into that accusing gaze. "It was you," she repeated. "Everyone saw it. You pushed the glass. You insisted I drink." "Claire, stop this," Edward said, his voice rising an octave. "You're confused." But the looks on the faces of the people around told another story. They had seen. They knew. And Claire could see the realization spreading across their faces, the understanding that something far more sinister than a failed dinner had happened there that night. "Sir, madam," one of the paramedics said firmly, "we need to take the patient now, but the authorities will want to speak with both of you." Claire felt herself being lifted, the stretcher moving beneath her. The restaurant lights passed overhead, blurring and merging. But before they carried her out, she saw something that made her blink in confusion. An older man had entered the restaurant, perfectly combed grey hair, wearing an impeccable suit. He looked at Claire with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. There was recognition there, and horror, and something more. Something like desperate hope. The man quickly approached the stretcher, ignoring the paramedics' protests. "Claire," he said, his voice breaking, "it's you, after so many years. My girl." Claire looked at him, confused. She didn't know him. She had never seen him in her life. Why was he calling her his girl? "Who are you?" she managed to whisper. The man's eyes filled with tears. "I'm your grandfather, my girl, Henry Carter. I've spent years looking for you, ever since I lost contact with your mother, and now I find you like this." Claire's world spun again, but this time it wasn't because of the poison. It was because of that impossible revelation. She had always believed herself to be an orphan, without family, without roots. And now this man was there, saying he was her grandfather, saying he had been looking for her. Before she could fully process that information, darkness pulled her again, and Claire surrendered to it, allowing unconsciousness to take her. Claire awoke in a white, clinical environment, the smell of disinfectant filling her nostrils. Fluorescent lights shone softly above, very different from the golden chandeliers of the restaurant. It took a few seconds for her to realize where she was. A hospital. She was in a hospital room connected to monitors that emitted regular beeps, a needle inserted into her left arm, connected to an IV bag. Her hand went immediately to her belly, an instinctive gesture of protection. The baby. She needed to know about the baby. "Everything's fine," a gentle voice said beside her. Claire turned her head and saw a middle-aged nurse with a comforting smile. "You and the baby are well. We managed to stabilize you in time." The relief that flooded Claire was so intense that she felt tears stream down her cheeks. The baby was fine. Despite everything that had happened, despite the poison, despite the nightmare, her child was safe. "What happened to me?" Claire asked, her voice still weak and hoarse. "You were poisoned," the nurse explained gently. "Someone put a strong sedative substance in your drink. Combined with your pregnancy, it could have been very dangerous. But you were brought in on time, and we performed a gastric lavage. The doctors are confident there will be no permanent damage." "Sedative," Claire repeated, processing the information. Victoria hadn't tried to kill her, but rather to knock her out. Why? What was the goal? To publicly humiliate her? To make her seem unstable in front of Edward and the other customers? The room door opened, and the older man from the restaurant entered, followed by a doctor carrying a clipboard. The older man, who had introduced himself as her grandfather, seemed to have aged 10 years since Claire had last seen him. His face was marked by worry, his eyes red, as if he had been crying. "Claire," he said, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," Claire replied honestly. "And are you really my grandfather?" "Was that not a delusion?" Henry Carter smiled sadly, tears forming in his eyes again. "Yes, my girl, I am. I'm a doctor. I work at this hospital. When I heard they had brought in a pregnant woman with suspected poisoning, I came to check. And when I saw your name on the chart, when I saw your face, I knew immediately. You're just like your mother." "My mother," Claire whispered. "She told me we had no family, that we were alone." Henry sat in the chair beside the bed, his hands trembling slightly. "Your mother and I fell out when she was young. I disapproved of some of her choices. I was too hard on her. She left home pregnant with you and cut off all contact. I spent years trying to find her, trying to apologize. I hired investigators, searched everywhere, but she was good at hiding." Claire felt a knot form in her throat. "And her? Where is she now?" Henry's face contorted in pain. "She passed away 3 months ago," he said softly. "A sudden illness. When I finally found her, it was too late. But she told me about you, gave me your name, told me where you lived. I was planning to look for her, introduce myself properly. And then this happened." Claire closed her eyes, absorbing that information. Her mother was dead. Dead 3 months ago, exactly when she had discovered she was pregnant. The two pieces of news, one she had never known and another so recent, collided in her chest with overwhelming force. "I'm so sorry," Henry said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. For not finding you sooner. For everything." Claire opened her eyes and looked at him. She saw sincerity there and remorse, and a love that had been denied by years of separation. She reached out her hand and Henry took it immediately, squeezing as if he feared she would disappear. The doctor who had entered with Henry delicately cleared his throat. "Miss Claire, I need to inform you about some developments. There are 2 police officers waiting outside who would like to speak with you as soon as you feel able." "About what happened at the restaurant?" Claire asked. "Yes," the doctor confirmed. "The restaurant's security cameras captured everything, and there are several testimonies from customers who saw the woman who was with you and your husband tampering with your drink." Claire felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. So it was true. Victoria had really tried to harm her, and there was proof. It wasn't just her word against hers. "You can let them in," Claire said. "I want to talk to them." Henry squeezed her hand tighter. "I'll be here with you," he promised. "I won't let you face this alone." The police officers who entered were a man and a woman, both in uniform, with professional but not insensitive expressions. The female officer, a woman of about 40 with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, pulled up a chair and sat near the bed. "Miss Clare, I'm Detective Smith and this is Detective Oliver. We need to ask you some questions about the incident at the Gardenia restaurant." Claire nodded, mentally preparing herself. "Can you tell us in your own words what happened tonight?" Claire started from the beginning, describing how Edward had invited her to dinner, saying it would be a night of reconciliation, how Victoria had appeared unexpectedly, how she had been pressured to drink from a specific glass. She recounted the conversation in the corridor, Victoria's veiled threats, the way everything seemed orchestrated. Detective Smith meticulously wrote everything down. "And how long have you known this woman, Victoria Stone?" "I only knew she existed," Claire admitted. "That she was my husband's mistress. I had never met her in person before tonight." "And is there any reason you know of why she would want to harm you specifically?" Claire thought about it. "She wants Edward for herself," she said slowly. "But there was something more. She said something strange in the corridor. She said I had something that should be hers, as if there was a previous history I was unaware of." The investigators exchanged a look. "In fact," Oliver said, "we found some interesting information about Miss Victoria Stone. She and your husband have known each other since adolescence. They were sweethearts before he met you." Claire blinked in surprise. That explained a lot. Edward and Victoria had a past, and Victoria clearly had never fully gotten over that past. "The restaurant's security cameras," Detective Smith continued, "clearly show Miss Stone swapping the glasses when you went to the restroom. They also show her putting something into the glass before pushing it towards you. We have witnesses from multiple tables who confirm having seen the same thing." "And what was in the glass?" Claire asked. "A strong sedative," Smith replied, "in high doses. Not enough to cause permanent harm to a healthy adult, but combined with your pregnancy, it could have had serious consequences. You were lucky." Lucky, Claire thought bitterly. She didn't feel lucky. But she was alive, and her baby was alive. Perhaps that was luck enough. "And Victoria?" Claire asked. "Where is she now?" "She's been detained," Oliver informed, "as has your husband, for potential complicity, although he claims not to have known about her plan." Claire didn't know if she believed that. Edward might not have known the specific details, but he had taken her to that dinner, had brought Victoria, had created the situation that allowed everything to happen. He was just as guilty as Victoria, even if in different ways. Henry, who had remained silent throughout the interrogation, finally spoke. "My granddaughter will need time to recover. Can this continue tomorrow?" The investigators agreed and stood up. "We'll need your formal statement," they told Claire, "but it can wait until you're stronger. For now, rest." After they left, Claire closed her eyes again, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Henry continued to hold her hand, an anchor amidst the chaos her life had become. The following days passed in a haze of medical examinations, police visits, and long conversations with Henry. Claire remained in the hospital for 3 days, under strict observation to ensure that both she and the baby were completely out of danger. Throughout this time, Henry barely left her side, making up for decades of absence with tireless dedication. It was on the morning of the second day that Edward tried to visit her. Claire was sitting in bed sipping chicken broth the nurse had brought when she heard raised voices outside the room. Henry's voice, firm and authoritative, saying Edward was not permitted to enter. Edward's voice, oscillating between indignation and plea. "She's my wife," Edward was saying. "I have a right to see her." "You lost that right when you allowed your mistress to poison her," Henry replied, with a coldness Claire didn't know he possessed. "Now leave before I call security." There was a pause and then footsteps receding. Claire felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Part of her wanted to see. Edward wanted to look into his eyes and ask why. Why he had let things reach that point. Why his love for her had died so completely that he could sit at the table and watch while another woman tried to harm her. But the larger part of her, the part that was growing stronger with each passing hour, knew that there were no answers Edward could give that would make a difference. What was done, and she needed to look forward now, not back. Henry entered the room moments later, his face still tense from the confrontation. "Sorry about the noise," he said, pulling the chair back closer to the bed. But I didn't want him to disturb you." "It's all right," Claire said softly. "Thank you for protecting me." Henry's eyes softened. "It's what grandfathers do," he said with a small smile, "especially when they have decades of protection to make up for." Claire returned the smile, feeling something warm expand in her chest. Family. She had family. After years of believing she was alone in the world, she had someone. And not just someone, but a grandfather who loved her with an intensity she could feel in every gesture, every word. Detective Smith visited again that afternoon, bringing updates on the case. "Victoria Stone has been formally charged with assault with a noxious substance," she informed, sitting in the same chair she had occupied before. "Bail was denied due to flight risk and the seriousness of the charges." "And Edward?" Claire asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "Your husband is not being charged at the moment," Smith said carefully. "We couldn't prove he had prior knowledge of Victoria's plan. However, he is under investigation. And there's the matter of the divorce, I presume." "Yes," Claire said, the word coming out more easily than she expected. "Yes, there will be a divorce." Smith nodded understandingly. "Given the circumstances, you'll have a strong case for full representation of marital assets and generous alimony, especially with a baby on the way." After the detective left, Henry sat back down beside the bed. She had mentioned something about finances, and Claire finally asked something she had been wondering about. "You said you're a doctor. Do you work at this hospital?" Henry smiled modestly. "I'm the clinical director here, actually. I've worked at this hospital for 30 years, and I have some investments that have been quite successful over the years." Claire processed that information. Her grandfather wasn't just a doctor. He was a well-established, respected man, and she was the only family he had. "I want you to know," Henry said, his voice turning serious, "that you don't need to worry about anything. I'll be happy to help you financially, with the baby, with everything you need. I have a house in Kensington that's too big for one person. There are plenty of spare rooms. You and the baby are welcome to live there, for as long as you like." The offer touched Claire deeply. Tears formed in her eyes and she let them fall freely. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, my girl. It's a joy for me. And when this little one arrives," he pointed to her belly, "my joy will be complete." They stayed like that for a while, in a comfortable silence that needed no words. It was on the afternoon of the third day that Claire received an unexpected visit. A woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed, asked, "Permission to enter." Henry recognized her immediately and grew tense. "Amelia," he said, his voice cautious. "What are you doing here?" The woman, Amelia, looked at Claire with eyes that seemed to evaluate every detail. "I came to meet Henry's granddaughter," she said, "and to offer information that might be of interest to you." "What kind of information?" Claire asked. Amelia approached the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm a lawyer specializing in family law," she explained. "And I'm also a longtime friend of your grandfather's. When I heard what happened, I did some digging into your husband and Victoria Stone." She opened a folder she carried and took out some documents. "Victoria and Edward were sweethearts during high school and early college," she began. "They broke up when Victoria moved abroad to study. It was during that separation that Edward met you, Claire." Claire nodded, already knowing that part from the police. "What you might not know," Amelia continued, "is that Victoria returned to the UK 2 years ago, and she and Edward rekindled their relationship just 6 months after your wedding." 6 months, Claire repeated, feeling the pain of that revelation. Their entire marriage practically had been a sham. "There's more," Amelia said gently. "Victoria didn't just want Edward back. She had specific plans. Emails we were able to access show that she intended to make you seem unstable, perhaps even incompetent to care for a child. The plan was for Edward to gain full custody in the inevitable divorce." Claire's blood ran cold. They wanted to take her baby from her. It wasn't just about dissolving the marriage. It was about destroying her completely. "Fortunately," Amelia said quickly, seeing the expression on Claire's face, "that won't happen. With the charges against Victoria and the emails as evidence of her intentions, you will have full protection. And I can represent you in the divorce if you wish. Pro bono, of course. Any friend of Henry's is a friend of mine too." Claire looked at Henry, who nodded encouragingly. "Amelia is the best," he said. "You'll be in good hands." "Thank you," Claire said to Amelia. "Yes, I'd like your representation." After Amelia left, leaving her contact cards and promising to visit again soon, Claire leaned back against the pillows, emotionally exhausted. Everything was moving so fast. A week ago she was an unhappy but still hopeful wife. Now, she was a woman with a newfound family, a victim of poisoning, preparing for a complicated divorce. "You're overwhelmed," Henry observed. "It's a lot all at once." "I am," Claire admitted. "But I'm also relieved. To know the truth, to no longer be trapped in that lie." "You are strong," Henry said proudly. "Stronger than you imagine. Your mother was like that too. Determined, resilient." "Tell me about her," Claire asked. "I want to know everything." And Henry told her. He spoke of a stubborn but brilliant daughter who dreamed of being an artist, who had fallen in love with the wrong man and had gotten pregnant very young. He spoke of his own failures as a father, his rigidity, his inability to accept her choices. He spoke of years of regret and searching. "She never stopped loving you," Claire said when he finished. "Even without saying it, even keeping her distance, she never stopped." "I know," Henry said, tears running freely down his face. "And I hope that wherever she is, she knows that I finally found you, that I will take care of you, protect you, love you as I should have done with her." Claire also cried for the mother she had lost, for the family she had never known, for the wasted opportunities. But she also cried with gratitude for having found Henry, for having a second chance, for having a future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. On the day she was discharged, Claire stood at the hospital entrance for a moment, breathing in the fresh London air. The sun was shining, the sky was blue, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. 3 months had passed since that terrible night at the restaurant. Claire was sitting on the balcony of Henry's house in Kensington, a cup of chamomile tea in her hands, watching the well-tended garden that stretched out before her. The house was exactly as Henry had described, large and elegant, with spacious rooms and an atmosphere of comfort Claire had never experienced before. She had moved there 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, and every day since then had been a step towards healing. Her belly was now visibly rounded, 6 months of pregnancy making her condition undeniable. She placed her hand on her abdomen, feeling the baby's gentle movements within her. A boy, the scans had revealed. She was going to have a son, and this time she would have family by her side to help her raise him. The divorce had been finalized the previous week. Amelia had done an impeccable job, ensuring that Claire received half of all marital assets, generous alimony and full child support. Edward hadn't contested much. His reputation was already in tatters. The company where he worked as a financial consultant had terminated his contract when the scandal came to light. Many of his clients were conservative families who didn't appreciate negative publicity. Claire should have felt satisfaction at Edward's downfall, but all she felt was a distant sadness. He had been her husband after all. She had loved him, or at least loved the idea of him. Seeing his life crumble brought her no joy, only a sense of waste. So much time lost, so much energy spent on a relationship that was doomed from the start. As for Victoria, she had been sentenced to 2 years of community service and 5 years of probation. The evidence against her was indisputable, but her lawyers had successfully argued that there was no intent to cause permanent harm, only to temporarily sedate Claire. The judge, though clearly disapproving of Victoria's actions, had been relatively lenient considering that Claire and the baby suffered no lasting harm. Claire had followed the trial, sitting in the gallery with Henry beside her. She had looked at Victoria, trying to understand what could lead a person to do something so cruel. But Victoria never looked in her direction, keeping her eyes fixed forward, her face a carefully constructed mask of composure. In the end, when the sentence was read, Victoria showed no emotion. She simply stood up, nodded to her lawyer, and was led away. Claire never saw her again after that day, and she was grateful for it. The balcony door opened and Henry stepped out, carrying a tray with cookies and more tea. Even at 65, he moved with the energy of someone much younger. The month since they had reconnected had been good for him too. There was more light in his eyes, more color in his cheeks. Having family again had rejuvenated him. "I brought your favorite cookies," he said, placing the tray on the wicker table between them. "The chocolate ones with nuts?" Claire smiled, taking one. "You're spoiling me too. Much." "Impossible," Henry said, sitting in the chair beside her. "I have decades of spoiling to make up for." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just enjoying the mild afternoon. It was April, autumn was approaching, and temperatures in London were starting to become more pleasant. "I received an interesting call today," Henry said after a while, "from the Art Institute where your mother studied before you were born. They're holding an exhibition honoring alumni and wanted to include some of her works. I said I'd ask you first." Claire brightened. She had barely known her mother's artistic talent. Her mother had kept that part of her life hidden, focusing all her energy on surviving and raising Claire in the difficult conditions they faced. "I would love to see her works," Claire said. "And yes, I think she would love to be included in the exhibition." "Great," Henry said with a smile. "I'll call them tomorrow. And I thought perhaps we could go together for the exhibition opening. It will be a beautiful tribute to her." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. Lately, she cried easily, which Henry said was normal with pregnancy hormones. But these tears weren't just hormonal. They were tears of gratitude, of love, of finally having someone who understood the importance of honoring her mother. "Henry," she said softly, "thank you for everything, for finding me, for taking me in, for making all of this mean something. You don't need to thank me, my girl, it's a joy for me, and when this little one arrives," he pointed to her belly, "my joy will be complete." As if in response, the baby kicked hard, and Claire laughed. "I think he heard you." The following months passed at a tranquil pace. Claire began attending childbirth preparation classes, always accompanied by Henry, who insisted on learning everything he could to be the best grandfather possible. She also started therapy, working through the trauma of the poisoning and Edward's betrayal. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. Amelia became a close friend, visiting regularly for tea and conversation about everything from law to gardening. Claire learned that Amelia and Henry had been friends since college, and there was an obvious affection between them that went beyond friendship, although neither seemed inclined to take the next step. On a particularly rainy afternoon, Amelia brought news. "Edward is moving to Edinburgh," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "He got a job at a smaller company there. A new beginning, I suppose." Claire nodded, absorbing the information. "I hope he finds what he's looking for," she said sincerely, "and that he learns from his mistakes." "You're very generous," Amelia commented, "more than he deserves." "Perhaps," Claire said, "but holding on to resentment would only hurt me. I prefer to let go and focus on the future." And she meant it. The future that had once seemed so bleak now shone with possibilities. She had enrolled in an online graphic design course, something she had always been interested in, but never had the time or courage to pursue. Henry had enthusiastically encouraged her, even setting up a small office for her in one of the spare rooms. The baby was born on a sunny July morning, after 12 hours of labor. Henry was there the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering words of encouragement. When they finally heard the baby's first cry, they both cried along. "Michael," Claire said when they placed the baby in her arms, her voice full of awe. "We'll call him Michael Henry after you." Henry couldn't speak for a moment, too many emotions blocking his words. Finally, he just nodded, tears running freely down his face as he looked at his great-grandson. The first few months with Michael were challenging but joyful. Claire discovered a strength within herself she didn't know she possessed. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, moments of doubt. Everything was overcome by the overwhelming love she felt for her son. And she was never alone. Henry was always there, helping, supporting, sharing both the challenges and the joys. One afternoon when Michael was 3 months old, Claire was rocking him in, the garden singing softly as he fell asleep in her arms. Henry was sitting nearby, watching with a smile. "You're a wonderful mother," he said. "Your mother would be so proud." Claire looked at her son in her arms, at her grandfather beside her, at the beautiful garden around her. She thought about everything she had been through, all the pain, all the betrayals, all the dark moments, and she thought about where she was now, about the family she had found, about the love that surrounded her. "You know," she said, "a year ago my life was falling apart. I felt lost, betrayed, alone. But look where I am now, look what I found." "Sometimes," Henry said wisely, "we need to lose everything to find what truly matters." Claire agreed, looking at Michael, who slept peacefully. She had lost a husband, but gained a grandfather. She had lost illusions, but gained truth. She had lost a life that had never truly been hers, and gained the chance to build a new one, authentic and full of love. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Claire stood there, rocking her son beside her. Grandfather, at peace in a way she had never imagined possible. It wasn't the ending she had planned, but it was a happy ending nonetheless. Perhaps even better for being unexpected, for being earned through pain and transformation. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Claire made a silent promise to herself and to Michael. She would be strong, she would be brave, she would be everything her son needed, and together, with Henry by her side, they would build a life full of love, authenticity, and hope. The journey had been long and painful, but Claire had emerged on the other side not as a victim, but as the heroine of her own story. And that story was just beginning. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Claire, Edward, and Victoria has touched your hearts and made you reflect on resilience, family, and new beginnings. As Claire discovered, even on the darkest nights, unexpected light can be found, and family can appear when we least expect it. If this story resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to our channel to follow more inspiring narratives that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Leave a like on this video and share your own stories of new beginnings and overcoming challenges in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you found strength in difficult times. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, love, and transformation. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories of triumph and hope. Don't miss our upcoming content. Until the next story, and remember, no matter how dark the night, there is always the promise of a new dawn.